We're beginning a brand new series of lessons called Sailing Again. We're going to examine the story of the shipwreck of the Apostle Paul, which we find in Acts, the 27th and 28th chapters. It's an excellent study in leadership, and it shows how to overcome difficult situations in life, like every one of us are going to experience sooner or later. And the Apostle Paul shows us how to do that. In this first lesson, I'm simply calling this Stormy Seas. Stormy Seas, because it's the build-up to the shipwreck, and it shows what we need to do to be in preparation for these difficult situations in life. We're going to take our text from Acts, the 27th chapter in this lesson. Let me read to you verses 1 and 2. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So, entering a ship of Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was also with us. So this is the beginning of this story. Notice, Paul begins his journey to Rome as a prisoner. He has no authority whatsoever. In fact, he is totally under their authority. But it's interesting how that immediately into this relationship with Julius, the centurion, and Paul, the apostle, Paul begins to build influence with him. And that's what leadership is all about. Leadership, true leadership, is basically all boiled down to this one word: influence. Influence. We find how that Paul begins to influence this Roman soldier that is over him, that has authority over his life. Now, this is a mistake that many people make in life. Positions and titles do not make us the leader. No. All that positions and titles do is give us the right to lead, but they do not make leaders. And so many people misunderstand that. They think that if you give me a title, then suddenly I'm going to have authority. It doesn't work that way, friend. All it does is give you permission to lead. But leadership goes back to influence. True success is learning how to sail through stormy seas. See, anybody can lead when things are going good. Anybody can, because there's no difficult decisions to be made. It's when we enter into the stormy seas, into these difficult situations, that's where we begin to find out who the true leaders really are. Now, I'm going to give you 7 points in this lesson concerning how to overcome the stormy seas, how to make wise decisions. Let me begin the first point. Be kind in the sunshine. Be kind in the sunshine. And I take this from verse 3, Acts 27 and 3. The next day, we landed at Sidon, and Julius, that's the centurion, treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and to receive care. Now that is remarkable, because they have just met. They've only been sailing one day. And after one day of travel, the Apostle Paul had already won the centurion's trust. He trusted him, or he would not have permitted him to go ashore and go visit his friends. That's not the normal procedure for prisoners. No, prisoners are usually kept in chains, kept under guard, under lock and key. You've got to keep an eye on these guys. You can't trust them. But Paul had already won the centurion's trust. That's what leadership is all about. Leaders are trustworthy people. They are people that you can put your confidence in them. And already Julius has been able to determine, I can trust Paul. Paul will do what he said he's going to do. Paul's not going to lie to me. Paul's not going to make me look bad and go trying to run away. And so he trusts him enough to allow him to go and visit his friends. Now, how do you gain trust? We gain trust by convincing people that we are thinking about their interest. Not about ourselves, we're thinking about them. Paul has already won the centurion's trust. See, when it comes to leadership, selfishness is always self-destructive. When people discover that the leader is thinking about himself and not thinking about them, guess what? They stop cooperating, they stop following, the trust barriers are broken. So selfishness always is self-destructive. Thank God Paul had enough character that the centurion looked at this man and said, I can trust him. You go ahead, go visit your friends and take the day off and go see if they can help you while we're here in Sidon. Now, here's the second thing that I learned from this story. The second point is what I'm going to call look for safety zones. Look for safety zones. And what I'm talking about is described here in Acts the 27th chapter, verses 4 through 8. When we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus. Cyprus, of course, is a large island there in the Mediterranean. They are sailing under the shelter of that. That means the winds are blowing, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly many days and had arrived with difficulty off of Sindus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete. This is another island, of course, in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Salmone. And passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens. That's a harbor, a small harbor. Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Now, notice what's happening in these verses. They are using the protection of these islands to protect them from the wind that is contrary. In other words, the wind is not permitting them to go where they want to go. And so what they're doing is they're using God-ordained places of security for protection. Now, God has given every one of us those God-ordained places of protection. For instance, family. Family is an excellent place of security. There are people in your family, they love you just because you are family, and they will help you because you are family. Church, a good church. Now, I understand churches are made of people, and people are not perfect, so there are no perfect churches. However, a good church can help you so much during difficult days of your life. Another one, friends. There are some people that like you. They love you. They care about you. That's something God put in their heart. There's just some kind of chemistry there that they're attracted to you, that they genuinely care for you and will help you. Now, what I'm saying is, all of these are God-ordained places of security that we should use to help us during these difficult times in life. Now, they've come to a small harbor here that's called Fair Havens. Fair Havens, that's a beautiful name, but it brings me to my third point. My third point is storms happen in unlikely places. This one begins at a place called Fair Havens. In fact, I've discovered that usually is when some of the very difficult situations in life occur for us. It's when we begin to relax and let down our guard and we think, I got this one made. This is going to be easy. And when we're not on guard, we're not paying close attention, that's when we can enter into some very difficult storms in life. And so storms can happen in very unlikely places, even places called fair havens. See, the reality is sometimes the storm comes when we least expect it, when we don't know that, we're not paying attention here. And so we think this is going to be okay. We've got this one made. There's not going to be a problem. Now, the point on leadership that I see in this is what I would say, good leaders take the initiative. They don't just sit and wait for problems to happen. No, they are alert. They are on guard. They're watching. They're doing their job. In this story, let me read from Acts the 27th chapter, verses 9 and 10. Now, after much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because of the fast, that would be the Day of Atonement. It was the most serious Jewish holiday, the Day of Atonement. They call it the fast. The fast was already over. Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and of the ship, but also of our lives. Now notice this. Here's Paul, the prisoner. He's being taken to Rome to stand trial for his life. And yet, what is he doing? He is giving advice. Good leaders do that. They give wise counsel, wise advice. And so Paul is giving them counsel of what they need to do. Now, I'm sure this comes from his spirit because he said, I perceive. In other words, there's something inside of me that tells me this is not going to be good. We're making a bad decision here. You need to sit down and rethink this one because we're going the wrong direction. And that leads me to my fourth point. My fourth point is learn to listen to the right voice. The right voice. See, the truth of it is, every one of us is listening to somebody. We're listening to someone. Are you listening to the right voice? Paul is saying to them, don't do this. This is a bad decision. I perceive, it's something in my spirit. I perceive that this journey, this voyage, is going to end in disaster. Now let me read to you again from the story. Acts the 27th chapter, verses 11 and 12. Nevertheless, the centurion was persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things which were spoken by Paul. He would live to regret that decision. It says, and because the harbor was not suitable to winter in. In other words, this place called Fair Havens was not the best harbor for the winter. The majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means that we could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the southwest and northwest, and to winter there. Now notice what's happening in this story. Paul is giving them counsel saying, this is a bad decision. Don't do this. Let's stay right here. We're going to be at least, it's not a nice, comfortable place, but at least we're safe from the winter storms. But the helmsman, who's the helmsman? He's the captain of the ship. He's the professional. If anybody knows anything about sailing, it's the captain. And then the owner of the ship. Oh, the owner, that's always an important person because he's the one that has the money. And the one that has the money has got influence. And so you have the captain, you have the owner, and then he says the majority. Now we're talking about the soldiers, the sailors, everybody that's on this boat. And we find out later there's actually 276 men that were on board this ship. So it's a large boat for that day and time. A lot of people's lives are at stake. And the helmsman, the owner, and the majority are all saying, let's go for it. This is our opportunity. And Paul is saying, don't do that. this is a mistake. Now, listening to the wrong voices. See, the truth of it is, all of them were wrong but Paul. All of them. Now, that's what gets so many of us into difficult situations, is because we're listening to the wrong voices. And when we listen to the wrong voices, we will end up making the wrong choices. Life is made of decisions, and some people can never connect the dots between what I did and where I am. All of these are wrong in their counsel. Now, as I said, every one of us is listening to somebody. Are you listening to the right voices? In this situation, in this story, only the Apostle Paul got it right. He was the only one that was right. He was telling them the truth, and it was something that, out of his spirit, that God had revealed to him. No doubt, Paul is a man of prayer, and God has put this in his heart. This is a bad decision. Well, I've learned that in my relationship with God and my walk with God, one of the things that means more to me than anything else is what I call the peace of God. The peace of God. If I have peace about it, it can be a very difficult situation, but if I have peace, I know it's all going to be okay. Other times, everything looks like it's falling into place. Everything's going to be okay, but something on the inside saying, watch out, something not right. Be careful here. And I've learned to listen to my spirit. Only Paul was right, but they were listening to the wrong voice. Listening to the wrong voice can be disastrous. And that's what happens in this story. If it had not been for the Apostle Paul, they would have all lost their lives. If it had not been for Paul, everything would have been gone. But before the story's over, they've lost the ship, they've lost the cargo, they've lost everything except their lives. And thank God for the Apostle Paul, or they would have lost their lives. Now, the fifth thing that I want to point out in this story is gentle winds can change quickly. Gentle winds, can change quickly. Acts, the 27th chapter, verses 13 through 18. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, they were putting out to sea, and they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. Now, that's a big storm. When you start naming a storm, it's usually a bad one. And so he says, so when the ship was caught and we could not head into the wind, we let her drive. In other words, the wind is just pushing them wherever it desires out into the Mediterranean Sea. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff. The skiff would be the little boat that they use to transport goods and passengers between the shore and the ship if they cannot dock at dry land. We secured the skiff with difficulty. And when we had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, fearing lest they should run aground on the Citrus sands. They struck sail and so were driven. Now notice what is happening. They have barely started out from this little winter haven called Fair Havens, a little place where they have found shelter from at the island, but it was not a good harbor for them to spend the winter there. Obviously, not everything they needed was there. And so they've set sail, but not many days after, there's this storm that arises that they cannot control. Now here's my point that I want to make with leadership. Good leaders use calculated risk, but they refuse to take unnecessary chances. Now, the truth of it is, we're all going to risk our lives for certain things. We are exchanging our time today for something. What are we going to do with our time? How are we investing our time? Are we making wise decisions or foolish decisions? Are we just wasting it? There's always risk that are involved, particularly when you're on a journey, when you are walking by faith. Faith always involves a risk. But good leaders refuse to take unnecessary chances. They don't risk people's lives unless it is absolutely necessary to do so. Now, going back to this story, they are ignoring the warning signs. They're all around them. Paul is not the only one that is talking. The weather is also talking to them. The calendar is talking to them. Let me show you some of the warning signs that I see in this story. The first one, the winds were contrary. In other words, they were against them. You need to pay attention to that. When the winds are against you, is this the right time? The second one is the wind not permitting us. We're not talking about a gentle breeze that's blowing here. No, this is a storm. The wind is so strong that they cannot even control the ship. They just have to let the ship be driven by the wind. The third one is it uses the word with difficulty. My. You talk about a bad storm. This is a bad storm. With difficulty. This storm is driving them, and it's beyond their control. The fourth thing I see is much time had been spent. Now, what this is talking about, it's getting late in the year. It's already past the fast, which the Day of Atonement happens toward the 1st of October, so we're coming into winter now, into bad weather. And so the clock is running out on this time, this journey. And then the fifth thing it said, sailing was dangerous. Now, all of these things are warning signs that they should have paid attention to. It's not just Paul that's talking to them, the warning signs. It's dangerous for us to ignore the warning signs. When we start ignoring the warning signs, we are leading a life that's headed for trouble. We're headed into, in this story, a disaster that's going to end with them losing everything with the exception of their own lives. Now, here's the sixth thing I see in this story. The sixth thing I would call, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. When we find ourselves caught in a storm, that's one of the things that begins to happen to us. We begin to say, all hope is lost. We're doomed. We're going to die. Now, let me read it to you. Acts the 27th chapter, verses 19 and 20. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, in other words, they are in the middle of a storm they cannot control. The next day, they lightened the ship. And on the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Now, as I said, don't lose hope. The leadership point of this story is good leaders project hope. Good leaders do that. In the midst of the storm, the centurion's not leading now. He's scared for his life. The captain is fighting, just trying to regain control of the ship. The owner of the ship feels like everything's gone. Everything I had, the cargo, my ship, we have lost it all. And that's when Paul steps up and becomes the leader of this ship. Let me show it to you. Acts the 27th chapter, verses 21 through 26. After long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me." Boy, they're listening now. "And not have sailed from Crete and have incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart. In other words, have courage. For there will be no loss of life among you. Boy, that is a bold statement to make in the middle of a storm. For only of the ship, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Notice this. Paul's courage comes from God. That's where he gets his courage. It comes from God. Now, here's my seventh point that I want to make in this lesson. It's what I call stay in the ship. Stay in the ship. Good leaders are always alert to danger that is around them, and it's always lurking somewhere in this story. Acts, the 27th chapter, verse 27 through 30. Now, when the 14th night had come and we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that we were drawing near some land. And they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for the day to come. And when they had let down the skiff into the sea under the pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the rope of the skiff and let it fall off into the sea. The point I make is, don't run from those that love you the most. That is a mistake. That's what the sailors are trying to do, to save themselves. They're willing to abandon the ship. But the skills of the sailors are going to be needed tomorrow. They will be invaluable in getting this ship to the island. Now, what we've got to understand, don't try to flee when you're under the storm. Don't try to save your own neck. You've got to learn to trust God. That God is the master of the waves, of your stormy seas. And if you will trust him and listen to the right voices, then God will give you deliverance, even in the midst of your stormy sea.